All right, let's dive into a big one today. Free will. Do we actually have it?
Yeah, the big questions.
Exactly, and we're going deep with this book, looking at chapter 7 specifically, all about the evolution of, well, what the book calls causal agents, and how that all plays into this idea of free will, especially up against determinism.
Right.
So are we really making choices, or is everything already decided by, like, the laws of physics?
A question that, well, people have been wrestling with that for centuries, haven't they? And I think you'll find as we go through this, it's not a simple yes or no.
Definitely. So this book lays out these different, I guess you could say, flavors of determinism.
Okay, yeah.
And one that really caught my eye is what they call physical predeterminism, which is basically saying the universe has this single timeline. It's fixed. Like, think of it like a movie that's already been filmed. No changing the ending.
Yeah, and to illustrate that, the author uses this really striking analogy. Laplace's demon, imagine, like this super intellect, right, knows the exact position and momentum of every single particle in the entire universe.
Whoa.
And using that with the laws of physics, it could predict absolutely everything, every little detail of the future.
A bit creepy when you think about it that way. Like, no spontaneity, no surprises, just a script we're all following.
Right. It does kind of challenge that gut feeling we have that we're in control, making choices freely.
Totally. And the author brings up how our current understanding of physics, what they call the core theory, which includes, the standard model, general relativity, those seem to govern every physical interaction we see.
Yeah.
So if those laws are totally deterministic, where does free will even fit in?
It's a huge question. It makes you wonder if we're all just puppets, and the laws of physics are the puppeteer.
Right. But then the book throws this curveball. Quantum mechanics. Does that change things?
It completely changes the game. Quantum mechanics brings in this element of randomness, this suggestion that the universe isn't quite as predictable as we thought. You see, the book explains how particles, like electrons, they don't behave in a predictable way. It's all probabilities.
Interesting.
It's only when we actually measure them that their properties become fixed.
So not a pre-recorded movie then, huh? More like one of those choose-your-own-adventure books.
Yeah.
But instead of us choosing, the universe is flipping a coin at, like, a quantum level.
Yeah, I like that. And it's wild the author points out this connection to, well, way back, the ancient philosopher Epicurus.
No way.
Yeah, he was wrestling with these same ideas thousands of years ago, and he said that atoms must sometimes swerve from their paths, the paths they should be on.
Wow.
And that's remarkably close to what quantum physics is telling us now.
Okay, so we've got this built-in randomness down there at the quantum level. Does that mean we're off the hook? Like, all our actions are just the roll of some cosmic dice?
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting. Because just because things are random doesn't automatically mean we have free will, right? The real takeaway here is that quantum indeterminacy, it breaks the absolute rule of necessity.
Meaning?
Think of it like this. Instead of being locked onto a single path, the universe itself has this built-in wiggle room, like room for choice to happen.
Wiggle room. I like that. It's what the author calls causal slack, right?
Exactly. So it's not that some things are predetermined and some are random. It's more about opening up possibilities.
Got it. So the future isn't completely set, but it's not pure chaos either. So what's filling in that slack? Where does agency come in?
And that is where things take another fascinating turn. We have to get into this idea of top-down causation.
Okay, let's hear.
Basically, this means that the way a system is organized can actually influence how its individual parts behave. Like, imagine building a house. You don't just throw a bunch of bricks together and hope for the best. You have a blueprint, a design, right? And that design determines how the bricks are arranged, giving the house its shape and its purpose.
Makes sense. So are you saying that living organisms, with all their complex structures and functions, they're not just passively reacting to the physical world? Like, we're actually exerting some kind of control, a top-down influence over our own actions?
You got it. Living things aren't just slaves to the laws of physics. They carry information in their genes, their nervous systems, information shaped by, millions of years of evolution and a whole lifetime of experiences. And this information lets them act with purpose, strive towards goals.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. This connects to free will. But the book also talks about causal determinism. How does that fit into all of this?
Right. So causal determinism is the idea that every single event is caused by a prior event. It's a chain reaction, basically. Now, at first glance, that might seem like just another version of physical predeterminism. But the author makes a distinction here. using Aristotle's four causes.
Four causes. Break that down for me.
Sure. Think of, let's say, baking a cake. You've got the ingredients, right? That's the material cause, what the cake is made of.
Gotcha.
Then you have the actual mixing and baking. That's the efficient cause, the actions that create the cake.
Right.
Then there's the recipe. That's the formal cause, the instructions that guide the whole process.
Okay.
And finally, you've got your desire for a delicious dessert. That's the final cause, the purpose behind it all.
Ah, so the first two causes are about how something happens, and the last two are about the why.
Exactly.
And is the author saying that if we only focus on the how, we're missing part of the picture?
That's it. Living organisms have purposes, and those purposes actually act as causes, shaping their behavior.
So we can't just look at the physical interactions to understand an organism. You've got to consider the goals, the intentions, the information that's driving those interactions. So we're not just robots then. There's a level of purpose, of intention that goes beyond just the material world. Deep stuff. But we're still left with the big question. How does this all relate back to free will? Are we really in control, or are we just playing out a script determined by this complex web of causes?
The big question. And that leads us to, I think, the most fascinating part of the book, the brain. How does this interplay of quantum randomness, top-down causation, information, how does that all play out in the incredible complexity of our brains? That's where we'll really start to see how agency, how free will might emerge from this dance of physics, biology, and information. So we got to zoom in on the brain, this incredible organ that really holds the key to understanding all of this free will stuff. Remember that causal slack, the wiggle room created by quantum indeterminacy?
Yeah.
The author suggests our brains might actually be taking advantage of that slack,
Like our brains aren't just running a set program. There's actual flexibility, room for those quantum fluctuations to have an effect.
That's the idea. The book really stresses that the brain isn't just sitting there passively responding to the world. It's actively interpreting information, making predictions, guiding actions based on, what we want, what we desire.
So not like a piano playing pre-programmed notes, more like a jazz musician, riffing on a theme. There's a structure there, but also room to improvise.
I love that analogy. It really captures that back and forth, the fixed and the flexible. Our brains do have established pathways shaped by, like we talked about, evolution and experience.
Right.
But there's still that room for variation, for those quantum events to, potentially nudge the outcome one way or another.
It's kind of mind-blowing, but I'm having trouble picturing how these tiny quantum events could actually impact something as complex as, making a decision. Like, could they really influence what I have for dinner tonight?
It's a great question. It gets right to the heart of the mystery. The author doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but they do offer some really interesting possibilities.
Yeah, what?
One idea is that these quantum fluctuations might act as a kind of background noise in the brain.
Wait, but isn't noise usually, a bad thing? Like static on a radio?
Well, sometimes a little noise can actually make a system more sensitive, believe it or not. It can help it break free from getting stuck and actually find new solutions.
Interesting.
Think of like shaking a snow globe. Sometimes you need that little jolt to get things moving in a new direction.
Right. So the author's saying this neural noise could help the brain explore more possibilities, break free from those rigid, deterministic patterns.
Exactly. It's like adding a touch of spontaneity to the whole decision-making process.
Well, wouldn't that just make our behavior random, chaotic? How do you build agency and free will on top of randomness?
And this is where that top-down causation comes back in. It's not just about random events at the micro level. It's about how that randomness gets harnessed, shaped by the bigger structures of the brain. Our neural networks, with their goals, memories, learned associations, they act as a filter, like a sculptor, shaping those random fluctuations into actions that actually make sense.
So our brains are like artists working with a unique material. They're not controlling every little detail, but they're using the properties of that material to guide the creative process.
That's a great way to put it. Our brains are constantly flooded with information from the outside world and our internal state. And all of that creates context, like a landscape of possibilities.
I see.
And within that landscape, those quantum fluctuations, they can pop up. And depending on our goals, motivations, experiences, those fluctuations might get amplified or dampened, steered towards certain outcomes.
So it's not that every tiny quantum event is controlling our actions directly. Yeah. It's more like creating this, subtle hum of possibility, and our brains are tuning into that hum, shaping it into something meaningful.
You got it. It's this amazing dance between chance and intention, between the, super tiny world of quantum physics and the world of our conscious experience.
Okay, starting to get it. Still feels a little abstract, though. Is there any actual evidence that this is how free will works in the brain?
That's the hard part, right? The brain is so complex. We're still in the early stages of figuring out how consciousness even emerges from all those physical processes.
Right.
But the author does point to some research that hints that quantum phenomena might be involved. Like, there's growing interest in this thing called quantum coherence in living systems.
Quantum coherence, I've heard of that.
It's this weird quantum property where particles can be in multiple states at the same time. It's been seen in things like photosynthesis, and some researchers think it might be happening in the brain too, allowing it to process information in a more parallel, efficient way.
So instead of just firing one neuron, then the next, our brains could be using quantum coherence to explore tons of possibilities all at once.
Exactly. And that could have a huge impact on decision making. It might let us rapidly weigh different options, see potential outcomes, come up with creative solutions.
Okay, that's amazing. But even if this quantum coherence is happening, how do we know it's connected to free will?
Yeah, it's tricky to pin down, for sure. But there are some clues. For example, some studies show that the brain's electrical activity, it has patterns of randomness, unpredictability that, well, they fit with quantum processes.
So it's not just that our thoughts and actions feel unpredictable. There might be an actual physical reason for that unpredictability.
Right. And there's also research on neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers in the brain.
Yeah.
Some scientists think their release might actually be influenced by quantum events.
Whoa.
Which would bring in randomness into how neurons talk to each other.
So like every thought, every decision is a tiny quantum experiment. The outcome is shaped both by the fixed structure of our neural networks and this unpredictable dance of subatomic particles.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Of course, this is just one interpretation, one theory among others. The research is all still very much in progress.
Of course.
But even with all the unknowns, it's such a fascinating area to explore. If we can show that quantum phenomena are part of consciousness, of decision-making, it would completely change how we understand what it means to be human.
Totally. It could change how we think about responsibility, morality. If our choices are really influenced by quantum randomness, how much control do we really have? This deep dive is getting deeper by the minute. We've gone from these deterministic universes to quantum swerves to the possibility that our brains are using the randomness of the cosmos to make choices. And I have a feeling things are going to get even more interesting as we explore what this means for, well, our understanding of agency and free will. All right, so we've talked about how the universe isn't this predictable clockwork and our brains aren't just passively taking in information. We've got quantum randomness opening up all these possibilities, and our brains, as complex as they are, seem to be using that randomness.
Yeah.
But where does that leave us with free will? Are we actually in the driver's seat, or is it all an illusion?
That's the big question, isn't it? The author argues that understanding free will really comes down to recognizing how all these different levels of causation are working together.
Okay.
It's not just about the basic physics, and it's not just random chance either. It's about how those elements get integrated, shaped by things operating at a higher level, our goals, our values, our experiences.
So we're not puppets being controlled by our genes or the laws of physics. We actually have this ability to take in information and make choices that line up with our own internal compass.
Exactly. The author really hits on this point that living organisms, especially humans, we're not just reacting to the environment. We're actively shaping it, creating new possibilities. And that's where true agency comes in, that ability to shape our world, to act with purpose.
But doesn't that kind of lead to a mind-body dualism thing? Like, if quantum randomness is making space for agency, wouldn't that mean there's something non-physical, something outside of physics making those choices?
That's a sharp observation. The author actually addresses that directly, and they argue that we don't need to jump to some kind of mystical dualism to explain free will.
Okay.
They introduce this idea of emergent causality. Basically, this means new levels of causal influence can come about from the complex interactions of simpler things.
So instead of a separate mind making the decisions, the mind itself emerges from all these complex interactions, and then that mind has its own causal powers.
Right. It's like, think about ants. One ant can't build an anthill, right? But a colony of ants working together, they create these incredibly complex structures. Something new, something powerful emerges from the collective behavior of all those simpler parts.
I get it.
So in a similar way, maybe consciousness and free will emerge from all the interactions of neurons, shaped by both the laws of physics and the unpredictable nature of the quantum world.
So free will isn't some magical force. It's more like a natural outcome of how complex our brains are, like our ability to process information and make choices based on a bunch of different factors.
That's the gist of it. And the author says this view of free will actually fits with both what science tells us and what we experience in our own lives.
Yeah.
I mean, we all feel like we're making choices, not just blindly following some program.
Right, right. But if free will is an emergent property, does that make it, I don't know, less real? Less significant?
Not at all. Emergent properties are just as real as the properties of the things they emerge from.
Okay.
In fact, they can be even more powerful because they're operating at a higher level of organization. Think about language. It emerges from individual sounds and symbols, but it lets us communicate, build societies, shape the world in huge ways.
So even if it comes from these complex physical processes, our capacity for free will is still a real and powerful thing in the universe.
Absolutely. And the author takes it even a step further, saying that understanding the emergent nature of free will actually makes our sense of agency and responsibility even stronger. Well, if our choices aren't predetermined, if they're actually shaped by our goals, values, and experiences, then we have more ownership over our actions.
That's an interesting way to look at it. It's not just about being free from constraints. It's about understanding how those constraints work and using that knowledge to make more conscious, more intentional choices.
That's it. And that brings us to, well, I guess the final challenge. How do we actually take all these ideas about free will and apply them to our lives?
Yeah, that's the big question. We're not all quantum physicists or philosophers. So how can we actually use this knowledge to make better decisions?
The author doesn't give us like a step-by-step guide, but they do stress how important awareness is. If we really want to exercise free will, we need to be aware of the things that are influencing our choices. Pay attention to your thoughts, your emotions, your motivations. Pay attention to external pressures that might be shaping your behavior, too.
So be more mindful, more deliberate. Don't just go through life on autopilot.
Exactly. And be willing to question your assumptions, your beliefs, even your biases. Our brains are constantly making predictions based on our past experiences.
Right.
And sometimes those predictions can, lead us down the wrong path or limit our options.
So part of free will is being able to break out of those mental ruts, to see things with fresh eyes and consider new possibilities.
Yes. It takes effort. It takes a willingness to step outside of your comfort zone. But it can be so rewarding.
How so?
The more aware we become of the things influencing our choices, the more control we have over our own lives. And that can lead to, well, more happiness, fulfillment, purpose.
It's not just about having free will. It's about using it in a smart way to make choices that fit with our values and goals.
Exactly. And that's a journey, a lifelong journey of learning and growth. We're all works in progress, always evolving. But by understanding this interplay of chance, intention, and this emergent causality, we can become more conscious, more deliberate creators of our own destinies.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've gone from the mysteries of quantum physics all the way to the complexities of human consciousness, exploring what it even means to be free. And, while the debate about free will isn't going away anytime soon, I think we've gained a new perspective. One that empowers us to embrace the mystery and move into the future with a renewed sense of agency and purpose.
And maybe that's the most important thing to take away from all of this. Exploring free will isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's an invitation to live more consciously, more intentionally, to make choices that shape not just our own lives,